From our studios this week in Los Angeles and Tampa, this is Green Tag Theme Park in 30. I'm Philip. I'm joined by my co-host, Scott Swenson of Scott Swenson Creative Development. And this is our final episode of 2024. And we're using this opportunity to look at some of the biggest stories and trends in 2024 that will dictate 2025, or sort of. So this is more like half look back and half prediction show. And to do this, we actually combined many different types of AI. So I threw a bunch of notes into both Claude and ChatGPT. And Scott looked at trends and used some AI summaries for trends. And I looked at all this and we put all this information together and we talked about it and we kind of curated a list based off of that information plus our own personal experiences to get us to a few items we're going to go through. We're not going to make it through all of them because that's how it always
because we never get through all of our show notes ever in any of our shows ever. So much so that we actually had to add a second show called Unhinged, but that's a whole nother story. Think of today as sort of like the diving board into 2025 that has been built by various forms of AI on what has happened in the previous year. So this is the diving board into 2025 to see exactly or what not only we feel, but also our various AI partners out there, that nebulous AI partner, feels that we should keep an eye on as we look forward into the new year.
Well, and number one is immersive is still on the rise. And I feel like I just, you know how I am with this because it feels like such a buzzword, but and I really thought it would go away because, we used to have like interactivity, if we remember back to, the just a few years ago, right? And now it's immersive, but I feel like it's going to continue to, it really is going to continue on because it's everywhere. I mean, it's, I think it's jumped into the mainstream, but this would include, story-driven experiences, personalization and premiumization, gamification, like experiential retail growth, all this kind of stuff is under this immersive umbrella.
Yeah, basically one of the articles that I read not too long ago said experiential entertainment moves into the spotlight. So it's going to become experiential, which I think is the next buzzword, perhaps. I don't know.
I know. I can't stand
immersive, interactive, experiential. I just say it's entertainment that people do stuff instead of look at stuff. That I try to simplify it, but yeah, and I think that we've already seen this start in so many places. It's on Broadway right now. It's everywhere. It's people are looking for things to do, and I think this was a trend that was already started. I think it got accelerated. My own personal opinion, I think it got accelerated due to COVID because people spent 2 years watching stuff, and so now they are still chomping at the bit to do stuff, to get out and engage with things that will engage back. Because let's face it, when you're at home watching old Dark Shadows reruns, they don't interact back with you. That's just something you watch and are reminiscent about. But now it's time to find ways and things that can engage back. And I think that's what we're looking at here.
That's an interesting point that Scott is mentioning about things that engage back, because I think there's still debate, or maybe I'm just imagining, but I think there's still debate in terms of how much agency the guest has in an immersive experience. Like, to be in a quote unquote immersive experience, especially with the mainstream, I don't think the guest needs to be able to control, like have impact on the story itself. I think that it's like almost like a gauge, right? Like, I think on the one hand, like the cruise stories we've just talked about, it's not like the Galactic Star Cruiser, like in the Disney Treasure, like you just go, into a bar and the bar is themed for the Haunted Mansion, or you go and watch a Coco dinner show. What makes it like quote unquote immersive in that sense is that it is a themed, narrative driven environment that surrounds you, and where the elements in the environment all follow the story, right? That's kind of their thing. But I think, Scott and I also think that there is room in that immersive entertainment for giving the guest more agency, and that agency has consequences and that can impact the story. So I think this is all part, fortunately or unfortunately, it feels like all this has become part of that one just immersive word. And so you can have the whole spectrum of things, but I think on the bottom end, it's like, do all of the elements support a narrative that a cohesive narrative that makes sense. Like, does the trash can, it's that classic example that everyone brings up, in our industry. Like, does the trash can look like it would fit in the world that it's in? Or is it a trash can you just brought out from somewhere else and stuck it there? That's like the bottom. And the top is like Sleep No More and what Scott is saying. Like, can the guest create their own, story essentially? Do they have a role in the story, and does what they do change the outcome potentially?
Yeah, I think that one of the reasons that this is becoming such a popular thing and will continue to be such a popular thing over the next few years, in my opinion, but is because people are going to want a sense of discovery, and Philip uses the term agency. I would like to say they have either the guests or the audience members, or however the non-paid characters in the story, however you want to talk about it, either have agency to truly change the narrative, or have a perception of agency, so that perhaps it is written. Years ago, I started using a phrase called the story sphere, which was, instead of a storyline, which was linear, it was three-dimensional, and it started and ended at the two poles of a sphere, but there were multiple ways to connect those two poles. And to me, that is kind of what that seems to be where we're headed. And with the help of technology, with various forms of technology in general, that has become something that is attainable. I think it's also attainable without high tech. I think you can do it with no tech. This is such an important topic that it has come up in pretty much every education session for every trade show that I've done over the last year, and it's looking forward into 2025 as well. I'm already scheduled to do a couple of different sessions on immersive and what that can mean, because I think everybody's a little bit afraid of it. I think that there are owners out there, especially in smaller attractions, who are terrified because they're like, well, I can't afford the kind of technology I need to make this work. But I guess my point is, let's break it into the concept, not the tools, so that you don't build a house based on the hammer you have. You build a house based on what you need for a house, and then you find a way to make it work. You can make it as high tech or as low tech as you want. And yes, it's easier if you're if you have, high tech AI that can generate storylines based on what anybody says. But at the same time, it can be as low tech as, I'm going to put you, instead of putting you in a theater seat to watch a show that takes place in a bar, I'm going to put you in a bar, and I'm going to serve you drinks. Yeah. And when you get up and move, that means that you have a different perspective, just like you would in a bar. So, it may be as simple as changing the atmosphere, changing the environment. This is what they're doing in New York with a lot of shows. The one I keep going back to as an example over and over again is the Kit Kat Club, which is basically cabaret in a club. And I think that this is going to become even more and more impactful. What I think is going to be interesting is if it does truly dive into or seep into what is known as traditional theater, I guess. Yeah. How do those shows tour? That becomes the next challenge. Do they start touring to spaces that are not traditional theater spaces? Do they start touring to arena spaces that can be turned into something completely different? I have a couple of friends now who have started what they call immersive spaces, and they are neutral performance spaces that can be set up like a theater, or can be set up like a club, or can be set up like a walkthrough experience, or can be set up like a big open room, can be set up like an art gallery. Even art galleries are becoming immersive. There are multiple shows out there, everything from Van Gogh to Dali, that you can have an immersive experience where things change around you. You are completely surrounded and entrenched in the world of the artist. So I think all of these things are things that we need to look forward to. Now, are we going to come up with all the answers and tell you exactly what everybody needs to know and needs to do with their own product? No, we're not going to do that in this show. But I think it's important to recognize that if you have a chance to give guests agency, to give them the opportunity to feel as though their actions have consequences or reactions, then I think you're going to be more ahead of the trend than behind it as we move into the new year. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I think the story sphere concept is interesting. And I think it again. I think it's also scalable, but it's interesting because essentially, it's similar to I think some of the big classic immersive experiences like Sleep No More.
Sleep No More.
In that there's coordinate like this where the story's going to begin, where it's going to end, and the guests are brought together for key moments. So in that sense, the story is controlled in that there's characters and they have beginning and they have an end, but you let the guests choose their own path in between those elements, right? So they all get the same ending and the same beginning, but the journey of how they get there is up to them versus a traditional, like you said, a theater production where everything is controlled and everyone gets the same show. They're allowed. And I think if you expand that writ large, essentially that's what theme parks were. I mean, you kind of allowed, again, at beginning, middle, end, right? The theme park begins, they all start at the ticket counter, they all end with the fireworks show or the main, everyone gathers at the beginning and at the end. They have the same experiences, but they can choose what rides they do in what order and where they eat and what they eat and how they explore. I think it's already very natively involved into that.
Well, and speaking of how it's being integrated into theme parks, I mean, we're seeing it really in every major park since the opening of Wizarding World of Harry Potter.
Yeah,
and it probably even started before that. I suppose you could say Amity with Jaws, but it's where they basically create a world that you live in. When you go to Wizarding World of Harry Potter, when you're there, you eat and purchase and ride all things that are part of that world. It's world building. World building. And I think that we're seeing that with what they've done with Arendelle, what Disney's done with Arendelle, what we've seen with
Super Mario.
Mario. Yeah. I think all of Epic. Universe. They're different world building that has gone on. And it goes down to on a much smaller scale with the wands for Potter, the magic bands for Disney. It's giving guests agency, and especially young guests, because mastery and control for a young guest is essential, and giving them the ability to manipulate their own world within the world that they've created. And I know this sounds really scary to some folks who are used to doing, song and dance shows that happen on a stage that everybody sits and watches. But don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Those of you who have listened to me for a long time, you've heard me say this. You heard me say this throughout all of the pandemic, and that was don't panic, just pivot. Take the skills and apply them in a different way so that you can stay ahead of, or at least with, the upcoming trends for experiential and immersive entertainment.
Well, and I want to mention too, there's not a place for those, because I think what we learned in the evolution of immersive this year and the past year is that it can't, or it doesn't seem to work where there's no story sphere. Like it's a good premise, but I think that's what, I think Galactic Star Cruiser was maybe too expensive. So we learned that there's a limit to the price. We learned that there's a limit to the premiumization. We learned that recently. We also kind of learned with Galaxy's Edge there's if it's just a world where you enter and nothing is happening, it's also not a great experience. So it needs almost that story sphere concept where there is some sort of beginning and end, like that. Like there needs to be.
And I would argue that both of those have that. But I think what happened is, in my opinion, and I know I didn't feel this way at first, but I've come around a little bit with Galactic Star Cruiser. I think they were 3 to 5 years ahead of their time.
I think the issue with Star Cruiser was that it was too expensive. I don't think the issue was that it didn't have a narrative. I think the issue with the Star Wars land initially was that it didn't have any entertainment, like you were mentioning, like classic entertainment. It didn't have a through line. There was no narrative. It was just a world that existed, and it was too much for the guests to try and figure out what to do. So I think
well, and if you want to create, I mean, one of the things based on what I've seen for Epic, one of the things that they've done there is they've created shows that would happen in the world that they've created.
Correct. That's it. So So that's the model they rotated to in the Star
Mhm.
Wars land. Or remember, like initially there was not any shows. Like
Right.
there was like they were like you're wandering on the street in Batu, and you're like, yeah, but like that's
Why?
too immersive because we
Yeah,
wouldn't
why?
just
Why am I doing
yeah.
that?
Why am I doing this? And what's going on? They're like, well, you choose. You choose why you're there.
Right.
You make and you're like, well, no, because like,
But
the,
I've also heard that is the same reason that some people absolutely despise Sleep No More, because they feel as though they
yep,
didn't see everything. Well,
correct, correct.
the idea here is to create so much to see that you can A, return, and B, each have your own experience. And I think we're getting around to that. I think that, what was it, 15 years of Sleep No More? I don't know how long it's been around. It's been around for a long, long time. Um, I think that has helped train audiences. I think that we are finally there. I think, it goes back to themed entertainment has become a giant D&D game. So you might as
Yeah,
well just hop on and get ready to roll the dice, because you're gonna have all kinds of immersion gamification, which sounds really easy but is really sort of challenging, because gamification to one person does not mean the same thing to another person. Um, to many people, gamification means winning and losing.
yeah,
To other people, it means playing the game for your own personal gain, and finding out, how far can you get in the journey or the quest. So, that's a little bit of a slippery slope there, but it is a form of experiential entertainment, and there's nothing, nothing wrong with it at all. And that can
yeah.
once again be high tech or low tech.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think to wrap up this section, we talked about the story-driven expansions. We talked about personalization and premiumization a little bit. Where Scott talked about that. Gamification we touched on lightly, but yeah, we also see that, of course, with the stories we've talked about this year. Of course, the expansion of Super Mario World. I mean, that's gamification in like Scott said, that there are high tech and low tech versions. But I think that's probably the most popular version
Mhm.
that made the most news, which is this, whole land where the entire area has gamification built in that you can play, in the area with scores. But we're seeing this more and more with AR and all that kind of stuff that's coming into it. And we've had it forever, right? The shooting games have been around. I'm like Scott said, like it could be high tech, low tech. You've had this kind of stuff hanging around for a while, but it's just becoming more part of this. And then experiential retail growth, we've talked about that too. But like the integration, it's like hopefully, well, hopefully, but you see a lot of the retail area starting to catch on that like immersive environments are better for selling items, which the theme parks have known forever. But okay, so
Well,
number two. Sorry, I knew we wouldn't get through all this. So
I know.
okay, okay. So that was number one. Number two we looked at is just AI, which is such a large category, but I think it's already integrated into a little bit of what we talked about because the expansion of AI is definitely helping with the immersive area because that we I don't think we talked about on the show, but there was a story about the Museum of Football recently. I think in Park wrote an article about it, talking about how they integrated AI into the museum exhibits where you would upload your picture and your name. And then as you would go through the exhibits, there were certain art pieces where the art would be re-rendered to include you inside of the art. So, you're the receiver, in a piece of art, and then, things are personalized for you. And that's like step one, right? I mean, so this is definitely like, they're related because AI can be used to help immersion. It doesn't have to be there, but it can be used to do that. But it's also like how much will it be used to create new entertainment and scripts and all that kind of stuff, which of course Scott's in the middle of.
Well, and the thing is, we've already admitted we used AI to create our show
Yep.
list for today.
Yep.
So, however, I think that when you're using AI as a controller, because I look at it as sort of like the controller brain for lighting design. When you're using AI as a controller to help guide people through the story sphere, then I think that's great. I think it's a wonderful tool. I think it is what has made immersive theater on a grand scale possible. Is because of that AI. I'm also curious, as Philip mentioned, to use AI as far as creating content. And
Yeah.
we all know it happens. I would say that quite a few of the ads and commercials that we see are created by artificial intelligence. There are more and more AI versions of scripts and songwriting and this sort of thing. Obviously, as a writer, this concerns me a wee bit, but I still, I still have to believe that at this point, at least, this may all go away, but at this point, at least, the heart, the emotion, and the pulling on the right heartstrings is still going to come from a human being, whether they feed that information into an AI generator or not. It's going to have to come from someone. The best phrase that I have heard recently is, and I've heard it from several different people, is AI is not going to take over the arts. However, if you can't use AI within the arts, then you may be left behind. So I think it's important to recognize that AI is here. It's not going away anytime soon. And the more you can figure out how to use it as a tool to benefit you, just like we did to create today's show notes, the better off you're going to be. So you can't ignore the fact that it's there, and especially when it comes to the world of creation, but use it in a way that benefits you. I mean, I'll be completely honest. I use AI to generate flavor images when I write scripts, because there are certain things that I can't draw in a timely enough manner or paint in a timely enough manner. So I will utilize AI to help create the images or ideas. Now, that then goes to a designer who will take that inspiration and build off of it. But I'll use it simply to make things happen in a timely manner.
I have a little bit of a soapbox about AI, because I know it's such a big thing in our creator.
Not a surprised look on my face.
I know. I know.
Philip has a soapbox.
I think it's very close to what Scott is saying, but I've been talking about this with a lot of people and thinking about this in our creator areas for a while. And my view on it is that, AI, it's definitely going to expand and become ubiquitous, and more of us are going to have these conversations, so I don't know. So I'm sure it'll change because AI itself will change, are we, is it possible for it to keep doubling capability? Or are we going to hit limits both in terms of electricity or capacity or investment? I don't know. Let's put all that aside. I think right now, the way I feel and the way I tell other creators is that everyone should be using AI as a tool, and you should be looking to use AI, but you should divide it into camps, basically. And the dividing line should be, is what you need. Do you need something that is just average, or do you need something that's good? Because right now, most of the AI that we have access to as individuals, what it does is it creates an average piece based on the inputs. So you input all of your writing samples, and then you ask it to draft you a XYZ, and it will give you an average of what you have done. So it's not going to give you anything great. So if you need to do a business plan that needs to be really good, you probably shouldn't just leave it solely up to ChatGPT to give you a business plan. What you should probably do is use it as a tool to help bounce ideas or to give you a starting point, and then you should refine it using your human skill. However, if all you need to do is generate copy about the latest boysenberry tart for the website, that's an average thing. Is anyone really going to care that copy is not, the best poetry they've ever read? No. So can you use AI entirely for that? Yes. So this is my dividing line. I'm like, if the output is acceptable at an average level, which is very similar to what we do when we delegate anyway, they always say, when you become a manager and you start delegating, I can do writing I'm a very, very good writer. And so I can recognize when writing is just average. And so then I have to decide if I'm going to delegate that to somebody else, am I okay with it being less good than what I could do? And that's, I think, the very similar line that you have to run here with AI. AI cannot write a great piece of writing. And I'm sorry, if you think what AI can do is great, then you're not a good writer because you are not good enough to see that it's not good. So is it average? Yes. I've used AI to help me write stories before, because sometimes it's just if it's just a story that's here's what happened, here's what this person said about it, put it together, that's average. That's reporting the facts. It's very easy. Fine. But in something like where you're trying to write an essay or something for publication that needs to poetically summarize all of XYZ, into a few sentences, AI is not going to be able to do that. Like, you will have to do that. So to me, that's going to be the dividing line.
Well, and
Now,
building off your example of corporate hierarchy,
yep,
for years people have said, I'm the CEO, I'm gonna have my VP of marketing
yep,
write something, and they then delegate it to somebody in their department.
yep,
It
yep,
then goes through the VP of marketing, who changes it and tweaks it and fixes it. Then it goes to the CEO, who always puts a stamp on it, always pees on it somehow. So use AI to whatever level you need to get that done, recognizing that you always have the ability to improve upon it. You always, and it's your not only ability but responsibility to improve upon it. If, as you say, Philip, you want something to be
correct,
excellent as opposed to
correct.
mundane.
Correct. Like, there's no like, in my opinion, honestly, there's no reason that you couldn't use AI to do like all of your, flavor text for the menus for your food festival. Like, no one's really like sitting there reading that out loud. You know what I mean? That's not a
Our
thing.
culinary friends may disagree with you, but that's okay.
Okay. Yeah. But the only caveat I want to add to this, based off of my experiments and research, is that my rule like holds true for things that humans are aware of the process. But if there are things where humans are not aware of the process, so for example, the best example is music. You talk to composers, and some composers, they have like a process that they work through, but a lot of them will admit that like the music process itself is not something they can like completely control. It's a lot of like, I try this, then I try this, and then I kind of get to what I think sounds good. Because writing there is a process, right? You outline, you draft, you go through, like, we know how to, like, we know how we're getting there. But I would say something like music, I think that the AI generated music, it's pretty good. Like, it's above average is what I would say. So there are like a few caveats where this is a little bit like above average. And so I think, for example, I think Scott had the example of this earlier, but like, I think if you if you just need BGM for the park zone and whatever, you will be able to use AI to do that. If you are writing a stage show, or you're doing some sort of like a Broadway performance, or you're writing something for a new show that's going to be performed, like a 30-minute musical at your park, that you have the budget for, then you need a composer. But like, if it's just like, we need just some BGM to put in this haunt somewhere, you could use AI for that. And I think it's going to be a little bit above the average marker on that, but I still don't think that it's at the point where you would, if the whole point of the show is the music, you probably shouldn't have AI do it. But if it's just a background piece of it, I think that it's good enough at this point that's beyond average.
And I'll be honest, I kind of write the same way you just described music. I'll try things and rewrite. They often say that the artistry of writing is in the rewrite, which I truly believe. I also think that, it's not black or white either. It's not, we're going to use something that is completely AI or something that is completely composed. Composers should use AI as the tool. Use it as a tool to get you from point A to point B, not point C, D, E, or E, which is where excellence lives. But don't be afraid to use it. Use it as a tool. Build upon it based on your own experience, gut instinct, whatever you want to call it, and continue to build from it. It's not going away. So it makes no sense to put your head in the sand, because I know plenty of artists who are saying, no, I would never use AI, and I blah, 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 blah. It's a tool. It's sort of like people who write with pencils saying, I'm never going to use a typewriter. That newfangled thing, it's not going to last. It's a tool. Use it.
That's a great point. Well, we're basically out of time, but I wanted to that's my last point I want to talk about. It's something that we've encountered also at work. I do believe all of us, our listeners, all of us, everyone, all of our teams should be using AI, and you need to start learning how to incorporate it now and have these exact discussions and make your almost like, add a section to your employee handbook about the proper use and expected use of AI. Like, we do that already at our company. We talk about it, and I do lay out guidelines where I'm like, this is like, we expect you to use AI in your job. This is when you should be using it, and this is when you shouldn't be. Like, this is an example of something that needs to be human proofed. But if all you're doing is just answering a quick question about, the voltage or about the line run for this light or whatever, that's fine to have AI. But if it's in these particular cases where it's very highly sensitive, I need you to have a human check on there. And, so I think laying that out now in your play handbooks is critical going into 2025. And also, like, honestly, I've told a lot of our staff that their jobs are probably not going to be safe if they can't incorporate AI, just because, like Scott said, it's a typewriter. Like, if you think about this as spell check, if an employee was like, I'm not going to use spell check, that's ridiculous. You'd be like, then you're not going to have a job, because I expect your stuff to be spell checked. I'm sorry. That's just the expectation.
Again, I'm old enough to remember that if you couldn't use your basic laptop or desktop computer programs,
Yes.
that you became obsolete as an employee. So I agree 100%. We just need to make sure that we're using it in the right way and using it for the right reasons as we jump into 2025. We hardly scratched the surface, did we, Philip?
Oh, thank goodness, because now
got
we leave
so much more to talk about.
We leave stuff for people to want to subscribe to our Patreon, even though we're going to be talking about questions. That's okay, though.
Yeah. So for those of you who are our listeners, who are our standard core listeners, thank you very much for listening. We hope you have an incredibly successful and love-filled new year. And for those of you who are our Patreon subscribers to Green Tagged Unhinged, we are going to be answering your questions in this New Year's episode. So this will all be, we'll call it user-generated content. All right. Guys, thank you so much. On behalf of Philip and myself, this is Green Tag Theme Park in 30. Happy New Year, and we'll see you next week.